I wasn't really taught how to be sustainable in a high stress environment, just given the details of how to care for patients without the details of how to care for myself. And so in the process, I was starting to look at why was I always so tired. And I think a lot of us have probably had those situations where we go to sleep and we wake up the next morning and maybe you got 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 hours of sleep and you're still exhausted. And that's where the conversation for me began.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rethink Aging podcast. I'm Dr. Cindy Libert, and I am joined with a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. Welcome, Saundra. So glad to have you here.
Excited to be here with you.
Yeah. Well, let me formally introduce you to our listeners. Have a little bio here for you. Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, she's a board-certified internal medicine physician. She's also a speaker and a prolific author. Her best-selling book, Sacred Rest, is why I invited her to come share her wisdom with us. The subtitle is Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, and Restore Your Sanity. I specifically want to have you share with our listeners all your wisdom around the 7 types of rest that you just very expertly outlined. I read that book several years ago now, and it's a big part of my self-care plan and my disease prevention plan as I age. And so I wanted to share that wisdom with our listeners. And you also have a new book coming out or released. So I want to dig into that because it's topics that I care about deeply.
I came about writing the book simply because I burned out. I burned out and I wanted to stay within the medical profession. Didn't feel like really we were taught, maybe you were, but I wasn't really taught how to be sustainable in a high stress environment, just given the details of how to care for patients without the details of how to care for myself in that environment. And so in the process, I was starting to look at why was I always so tired. And I think a lot of us have probably had those situations where we go to sleep and we wake up the next morning and maybe you got 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 hours of sleep and you're still exhausted. And that's where the conversation for me began because I knew there was something else going on. I checked all the lab work. I'm a physician. I can check labs on myself whenever I want to. Checked all the labs, checked all the tests. I'm perfectly healthy. Nothing's wrong with me, but I know that I'm exhausted. And so that's where the conversation really began, looking at what type of tired am I? Because it wasn't just physical. And so from that came these 7 types of rest, which include physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yes. You are not alone. That is one of the common complaints of patients, as you know, of patients as well. It's just like, Doc, I'm so tired. I'm getting sleep. I'm trying to do all the right things to take care of myself, but I'm so tired. And yeah, I love that you took your personal challenges with burnout and turned it into something so beautiful that you're sharing with the world. So one of the types of rest that really intrigued me, and I love the way that you coined that term, creative rest. I think probably when people hear that, at first they think they need to take a break from being creative, but that's not at all what it's about. Share with us about that topic of creative rest and how it's important to you.
Yeah, creative rest really, let me start by saying what a creative rest deficit is. I think that's where people probably don't really feel like they need it. If you do any type of problem solving, if you're thinking outside of the box, if you're having to come up with ways of creating things, I mean, everything from trying to creatively manage a schedule where you're trying to be in 2 places at once, or you're being creative in how you're putting together a meal because, times are tight and you don't have all the ingredients, but you want to make something for your family. Or like, but for myself as a physician, you're hearing people give you a list of complaints, and you're having to creatively take all of that information, put it together in your brain, and spit out a diagnosis. If you're someone who's in marketing, if you're in sales, we're constantly using creative energy. But most of us don't have any type of system in place to pour back into the place of deficit. Because if you're pouring energy out, eventually that bucket gets depleted, it gets empty. And that's what creative rest does. It pours back into that creative bucket. So the way it works is it's anything that actually inspires you. So whether that might be going to an art museum or listening to music, or maybe for you, it's actually going outside in nature and seeing the trees and the flowers. Or for some people, they've experienced it, but they didn't know what they experienced because a lot of the research shows about 60 to 70% of people, when they are around bodies of water, they have a sense of restoration. They're
Mm.
not sure what they're feeling, but they're like, something about the beach just makes me feel restored or energized, or it makes me really just feel enlightened. Some people get that around the mountains. That's creative rest. You're allowing created beauty, whether it's naturally created or man made created,
Mhm.
to inspire you and to pour back into your level of inspiration.
I love it, and you could see behind me my
Your
creative
creative
breath that
rest.
I've
Yes.
given to my
I have
patients so
mine
they
behind
can.
me as well.
Yeah, I love that because you put, words to something that I've long known about myself is that, I am a very creative person, and when I get out into nature and just, with beautiful landscapes and, do hikes, it and clearing my head and not, churning on problems, it actually really does renew and restore and gives me creative juices.
Mhm.
So I love that concept of creative rest and just highlighting it for especially people that do use their brains a lot and get drained of that creative energy. It's so important that we take time just to reset and step away from the computer and our desk and the daily grind and just get restored so that we can continue to pour out that creativity and creative solutions to help others. Tell us more about the physical rest piece that's kind of a no-brainer that we take time to not only get adequate sleep but also to rest our bodies, recover in between, exercise. What do you find are obstacles for people getting that physical restorative rest that they need?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is many people think physical rest is just about cessation activities. And so they think and really all of the type of rest that oftentimes think, oh, I just need to stop something. And
Mhm.
so when we look at it that way, with physical rest, we have lots of passive forms of physical rest we can do, like taking a rest day if you're a athlete or something, or having or making sure you're sleeping and taking naps if those are beneficial to you. But all of those are cessation or passive forms of physical rest. There are also some active forms of physical rest that include things like stretching or taking a leisure walk. And sometimes physical rest can even look like doing something like just being aware of your own workstation and how your body engages with the workstation, the height of your computer monitor, whether or not your spine is in proper alignment as you're working on your computer, where are your wrists positioned at, how is your body sitting in your chair, are your feet able to fully touch the ground, or are you kind of on your tiptoes? And so there's so many components with physical rest, but at the very heart of it is making sure that your body has the ability to get into a healthy state after having been in use. So whether that use be lifting up, something, maybe you work a very physical job and you're lifting things all day. Maybe you're a grandma or a mom and you're lifting grandbabies and kids. They weigh 20 to 30 pounds too. So being aware of how you're using your body and if you're doing things to undo the damage of that use.
Would you put massage therapy The
Absolutely.
physical rest.
Massage, chiropractic, infrared sauna, red light therapy. There's so many different modalities now of getting physical rest, but I think too often we just think, "Oh, I just need to stop. I just need to lay down." And sometimes, especially if you're someone who has a job that you're seated all day, or maybe you are retired and you just sit all day because there's nothing that has you on your feet anymore. Being aware that, sedentary, this Dr. Cindy, on their sedentary lifestyle right now is probably as dangerous as smoking and some of the other things
Mm.
that we used to tell people to stop doing.
Yeah, yeah. I that's it's so interesting I like that you involve, like, stretching and walking, um, and physical rest. I tend to be sometimes, too regimented with my physical fitness routine, and last fall, I decided, I probably need to add something more gentle and feminine, and so I started doing some dancing and,
I love
often
that.
just really you still get a little bit of cardio with it,
Hmm.
but just the gentle stretching and the flowing and the movement is very restorative for my body, and you can ask Deborah, my patient care coordinator. Sometimes she'll hear me in between, patients, doing a little dancing here in the office just to, like, shake out the tension and stress that can be involved with sitting at a computer and being sedentary, so thank you
And that's
for
so important with aging because I think sometimes we don't realize, one of the biggest issues of people losing their independence as they age is that they lose their balance and flexibility and their mobility. And so dancing really, with the whole choreography, it forces you to really focus on balance and the coordination that's needed for that. Tai Chi is another great one, helps with the memory aspect as well. So it helps with some of the brain cognition aspects of it. And so I think we really just have to realize that there's healing in the movement, and to find movement that's not always, and yes, we need to strength train, we need to build our bones if you're a woman. Men too, you need to that bone health, density health, as well as some muscle rebuilding just for metabolic disease fight back. But I think even with all of that aside that we need to do, we also need to add some of that motility stuff that isn't as cute and fancy, and it's not going to make you look buff, it's not going to give you a six pack, but it might keep you from falling and breaking a hip.
Yeah, absolutely, I love that. Thank you for sharing. So the physical we've talked about creative rest, physical rest. Let's talk about sleep a little bit, with the physical rest piece.
Hmm.
One of the things I'm often preaching about to my patients is the dangers of, like, prescription sleep medications, the sedative hypnotics, and then the over-the-counter, drugs like Benadryl that can be, uh, toxic to our brains, and I share that drugged sleep is not really restorative sleep. What have you learned for yourself, and what do you share with your patients about how to set yourself up for a good quality sleep without having to rely on those, medications?
Yeah, that's so important. There's a place for some of those drugs. There's certain situations I think that they're okay in, but they should not become your daily only way you know how to go to sleep. Is you have to medicate. If you have a death and your spouse dies and you can't sleep. Okay, take something for a week just to get yourself, through a hard time. But at some point, we have to retrain our bodies how to be able to naturally go to sleep. And a big part of that I find is many people treat our bodies almost like a light switch. Is like, I'm running
Mm.
around doing all the things, I'm busy, and then, oh, it's 10 o'clock, click the switch and knock out and and get the 8 hours, and make them restorative. And that doesn't really work. The body has it functions on a rhythm. The circadian rhythm is has fluctuations, natural fluctuations with energy and cortisol release. And those are supposed to be in response to how your body is moving and functioning through the day. So as you're getting towards nighttime, your body assumes things are going to wind down. It's going to get darker wherever you're at. You're going to slow down somewhat. You're going to decrease some of the mental processing. But a lot of us don't do that. And so I find that a big part of helping people kind of re-engage with healthy sleep is helping them kind of reprogram their circadian rhythm and get back in alignment with that. Everything from, an hour before going to bed, not just getting off your devices. That's fantastic, but most of us won't do that.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to get off of them, can you go on Amazon and spend $30 for some light blocking glasses that you put on at least while you're using the device so
Yeah.
that the blue light is not actually, working against your circadian rhythm? Can you turn off your overhead lights and maybe use just a very dim lamp? So that you're not having all this bright light right before going to bed, making sure the temperature in your bedroom is lower so that your body can start to kind of down regulate that way, keeping the room as dark as possible while you're sleeping, maybe even having it so that you have a window where the windows, there's no light coming through the window. You're seeing darkness when it's dark. And as the sun comes up, light comes into the room naturally and gradually to help kind of wake your body back up rather than just having the alarm blaring as the only way of waking up. And on top of that, I think with so many people having Apple Watches and Fitbits and Garmin's and, Aura rings and all the things, all the different ways we can track our sleep now to actually monitor your level of deep sleep, not just your total sleep, because sometimes you just get a lot of bad sleep and you're not actually getting any deep sleep because that's where the restoration really occurs. And so to monitor your level and your amount of deep sleep, because the more deep sleep you get, the more rested you will feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yes, I've got my Aura ring. I've worn this for years, and I've learned a lot of important lessons about my own body and, it's commonalities with others as well. A late night meal or snack will just wreck the restorativeness of my sleep. So that's been eye-opening to see how that impacts recovery overnight. And yeah, so if you have access to a wearable, getting that data can be really helpful.
And there's so many natural things now that help with sleep. A lot of people are magnesium deficient. That tends to help quite a few people sleep. If you're a woman going through menopausal things, you may want to get that checked out because that can have a huge effect on sleep. I know some of my patients and friends enjoy sage tea, and sage tea has this kind of calming effect on some of the hormones. And so it's completely natural. Sage, the same stuff that's in your Thanksgiving dressing, is basically an herb that you can buy in a tea bag. And use that. I mean, there's so many different ways. Bananas before going to bed, your potassium and some of your other minerals are low. So I think we have to experiment a little bit, have a bit of an adventurous mindset around finding out what is needed to help us sleep. Because if you're not sleeping well, it's your body telling you something is not happy in me that is keeping me from being able to go to sleep. And sometimes it can be one of these other rest deficits because I find if you have like a mental rest deficit and you can't turn your brain off before going to bed, you're all thinking all the thoughts. You need to
Yeah.
deal with that because that might be what's adding to the issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a great transition into maybe sensory rest. I know I talk a lot to my patients about overwhelm and overstimulation and how that can, just drive disease and burnout. And what advice do you have about the sensory rest component, and what to do if we have a deficit of that?
Yeah, sensory rest deficits and sensory overwhelm, for the most part, are so prevalent right now with all the gadgets that we have. And so, a big part of it is really being aware of the sensory input around you, even the things that you probably aren't thinking about, like if the TV's playing in the evening or anytime during the day and nobody's really watching it, music playing 24/7, it just adds to the sensory overload. It's this kind of consistent onslaught of sensory input. And we already have so much of that with jobs being remote and on computers, and everybody's on their devices for everything from email to Netflix to everything in between. And just realizing that moments of sensory overload can actually lead to some psychological responses. For some people, when they become sensory overwhelmed, their response is irritation, agitation, and sometimes even rage and anger. And so, for people who say, I'm chronically anxious, I'm always kind of wound up, could it potentially be because you're also chronically stimulated? And so you're always having noise or something around you at all times. And so starting to look at how to down regulate some of those noises. So if you're in a noisy workplace, maybe you hear phones all day long or something like that, or you have a spouse who likes to watch TV all day and it's kind of getting on your nerves, you can have like noise cancellation earphones that you keep near you. Pop them in your ears. You don't have to play anything for them to block the noise out. Just pop them in your ears and just let that be a moment of sensory reprieve. 5 to 10 minutes oftentimes is enough to give a bit of a neurological reset so you don't feel so stimulated. If you're working and doing a lot of, during COVID, people started talking about Zoom fatigue. Had nothing to do with Zoom. It had to do with sensory overload from looking at screens for too long. Something as simple as having like a 10-minute sensory deprivation break in between your meetings. So you're doing back-to-back meetings. Maybe you're doing coaching calls or something with someone, or you have team meetings or something on your computer. Take a 5 or 10 minute break where you close your eyes, and you don't even have to move from the computer. Just close your eyes and let that be a moment of sensory reprieve so that you can have that bit of reset with inside of yourself.
Yeah, I love that. It's where all the types of rest can kind of blend together, especially for me in nature. So typically, when the weather's warmer, right now it's pretty cold here in February, but usually at lunchtime I'll bust out of the office and just take a couple laps around the parking lot to get that creative rest, get the sunshine, mental rest, sensory rest. Just a little bit. There's some trees lining the parking lot, so a little bit of sensory rest, and that can be so restorative, just like a reset button. Um, so let's thank you for that. There's just so much vying for our attention with social media and news and just that um, sense that we have to be constantly available and communicating on our devices and things. So it is important to have boundaries around that for ourselves, for our health. Um, Wanted to talk about, you mentioned mental rest, and that often comes up in patient care where people are dealing with not only just list of worries, but also that internal dialogue, the harsh critic inside that can you know give us a lack of mental rest when that's dragging people down. How do you invite people into mental rest, and how do you see that intersect with the spiritual rest piece?
Yeah. So, oftentimes with mental rest deficits, a lot of people experience things like lack of concentration or difficulty kind of clearing their mind, their chronic processors or chronic regurgitators of information. So they're constantly kind of flipping things over in their head over and over again. Scripturally, there's scriptures that talk about taking thoughts captive, and so there is a kind of spiritual connection between the two. I think very for those who may not have a faith-based reference to mental rest, if you just think about it from the aspect of a mind that is constantly kind of processing never gets to a place of peace. it always feels like it's stressed. It never really gets to a moment of like breathing. And so I think for a lot of people, it's finding the things that actually help you to be able to replace that constant processing. For some, something as simple as we call it a brain dump, but it's basically to whatever the thoughts are, jotting them down. Because if you're trying to go to sleep at night and you're processing something, if you jot it down on like a notepad or piece of paper, the brain has a sense of release after that activity because now it's captured. The brain doesn't feel responsible to hold on to the information because you've captured it on something concrete. So that's a quick way for a lot of people to release it. Doesn't mean it's something you don't need to process. Maybe it is something you need to actually look at later or remember, but now you've captured it in a way that you can come back to it. And some people do it on their phones. That's not my favorite way of doing it, but whatever. So prefer that you do it on something like a piece of paper because then you're not introducing the blue light and all the other things right before going to bed. Some other people may benefit from doing activities that actually help them to release those thoughts and to kind of meditate on things. Sometimes it's even subconscious. Like if you have someone who says, "Oh, I go for a jog to clear my mind," that doesn't sound like rest if someone says they're going for a jog. But oftentimes the reason why they feel like their mind gets cleared while they're jogging is that the rhythmic motion of I got to think about my breathing and I'm thinking about my cadence. So I don't go too fast so I can't breathe and I need to make sure I breathe deep. It becomes a mindfulness practice. They're actually meditating on those two things, which then push out everything else, which then makes their brain feel free so that they're able to now, it's like, oh, my thoughts have been cleared out. I can actually think more clearly. Some people, cycling does that. So you have to determine what it is that allows your brain to get to a place for mindfulness. And then for those who have a tendency to worry or, they're ruminating on the negative, they're constantly thinking about all the things that can go bad. To me, this is where really bringing in a spiritual renewing of the mind process can be very helpful. And I specifically term this process having a word chair. So it's a word that you're going to seat your thoughts in whenever you're thinking of if we consider your brain like a 5-year-old child, and it's like you're trying to tell the child to sit in this chair, and the child's like, "Ooh, squirrel," off it goes. So you're going to redirect the child back to the chair. How does that work in your brain? So I have 2 kids that are in college, and so like any parent, you have worries when your kids are first out of your house in college. And so I used to, it would be 5, 6 o'clock, whatever time it is. And I'm like, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder if they're eating, which is a ridiculous thought. They're boys, they're going to eat. But that's my thinking. I wonder if they're eating. I wonder if they're eating, if they're getting all that they need. And the word that I chose to use as my word chair is faithful. So I like to choose a characteristic of who God is and who I believe him to be. That's how I associate my word chair. And so one thing God has always been in my life is faithful. And so whenever I think about, oh, well, this could be happening or that could be happening, and my brain's trying to run around and think all the negative, in my head, I say the word faithful. It becomes the place I want to seat my thoughts in because I refuse to let them run around and think all this other stuff that's not beneficial and not getting me anywhere. And by doing that, I trained my brain to not just run down these negative paths because I can bring it back under submission to something I know to be true in my life. And people can do that in so many different words. You get to pick what words or phrases become your word chair, what's meaningful to you. But you can definitely bring a spiritual concept to that. And that the way I do that is characteristics of God or things that his word says.
Beautiful. One of my life verses is Romans 12:2. Be renewed, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's a beautiful, really practical way to do that, where you take the real life worries and just associate that with one characteristic of God to center you and anchor you in that truth. It's really beautiful. Okay, well, why don't you share a little bit more about spiritual rest. I know we could talk about that all day. How do you talk to patients about spiritual rest? How do you tend to your own spiritual rest? Just give us an overview.
Yeah, so for me, spiritual rest has multifacets to it. So I have patients who are of same faith as myself. I have patients who are atheists. I have patients who have completely different faith beliefs than mine. And so I approach spiritual rest like this. At the very core, spiritual rest is the need we all have for a sense of belonging and purpose. So that crosses all faith barriers. And so whether someone believes in what I believe or not, the majority of the population believes that everyone should have a sense of belonging, a sense of love, and a sense of purpose. And so, if we start with just that, and let's see if I'm talking to a patient who does not have a faith-based system. I start asking them questions about what is it that you want to pour back out into the world?
Mm.
What is at the very heart of what makes you feel connected to greater humanity? What is the legacy of you being on earth that you want to leave behind? And so that gets people thinking outside of themselves, because a big part of spiritual rest is the good feeling or the restoration that we experience when we are in service to another, and we are doing it from a place of just love and belonging. We are showing up as our true selves. And that true self is the true self of you, whether you believe in God or not. Whether- it's
Or
who you were created to be before the foundation of the earth, whether you have any frame of reference on how that came about. And so that is kind of the basis of it. For those who do have a faith-based system, spiritual rest also includes having relationship with the God who put you on earth to do that purpose, because it then invites you into a level of conversation and intimacy to go deeper into the belonging aspect of that and the purpose aspect. And that was such a huge part of conversation when with people as I shared Sacred Rest. Some people were like, "I didn't know this book had faith in it." I'm like, the word sacred is like in the first part of the title. I mean, I'm not sure what you thought was in it, but but it's a combination of science and spirituality, because I don't feel like they're exclusive of each other, but that they actually work together. But that led to my second book that I wrote around the topic of rest and restorative practices, called Being Fully Known. The subtitle is The Joyful Satisfaction of Beholding, Becoming, and Belonging. And a big part of that is to help people understand who don't have a faith based system, and even those who do, that the beholding is actually where we all have to begin. We have to begin to see God and see Him in what we're looking at, see him in the creation and how in people, to see him in all things. How can I behold God in my day to day life? I'm not going to physically see Jesus. He's no longer walking on the earth as he did, 2,000 years ago. But I can see him in you, Cindy. I can see him in your care for and love for your patients. I can see him in my neighbor, who is someone who's bringing vegetables over and who's a provider and a giver. I can see him in the sunsets. I can see God in so many different ways if I'm willing to behold him. And the more I spend time beholding who God is in my day to day life, is an invitation for me to become what I behold. If I can see it, then I can become it. But I have to be willing to first see it. And then as I'm seeing things that I'm like, oh wow, I really appreciate that part of who this person is. I really appreciate how she loves and cares, how Dr. Cindy loves and cares for her patients, and I see how it reflects the love of God. And I can have a hunger to become more like that, which in essence is making me become more like Jesus. And from that place of becoming, that's when we step into our true levels of belonging, because we're not trying to fit in. Because fitting in is its own stressor. It's not, that's not true belonging. Belonging is when you come as who you are, bringing what you already have inside of you, your traumas, your dramas, everything you've lived through, all the stuff, and you're finding the places where your unique set of gifts, talents, and pain actually adds to the situation. It adds to the healing of the room. It adds to the fullness of what the room understands. And that's real belonging. So that doesn't mean it's always easy, because sometimes you're bringing in a perspective that no one else is saying because no one else has lived it. But we can't hold back, because that's that type of belonging that gets to the real heart of spiritual rest, because you're not trying to be someone else and you're not trying to have someone else's experience. You can take ownership of your own experience and be fully known in any environment without fear, shame, or guilt.
Wow, such rich wisdom, Dr. Saundra. I know that I will be buying your book, your latest book. Uh, and I frequently send patients to take your sacred rest quiz, just so they can, get a sense of where they have deficits and the various forms of rest. And I'm sharing your book with a lot of people. Let's say that. And I really, really resonate with what you're writing about in this new book. Tell the title of the book again.
The title is Being Fully Known.
Being Fully Known. Wow, that is just so timely. I find that more and more the deep, intimate conversations I have with my patients lead to this topic of identity. Who are you, and what are you here on this planet to do? And it often comes up around people not feeling good enough, not having perfectionism in their health behaviors, or just feeling like they're missing the mark, they're failing in some way. And so we end up talking a lot about grace for having grace for yourself,
Mhm.
and talking to yourself as if you were talking to a loved one. And so I think that new book, Being Fully Known, will be a really good tool to share with others. So it is such a gift to have you here. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing this deep, beautiful, holistic wisdom about rest, the various forms of rest, and then being fully known. Such a beautiful extension of that, going deeper into the ways of healing.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Cindy. And
Yeah.
thank you for sending people to restquiz.com. That there are, to date, we've had over 500,000 people who have taken the rest quiz to find their rest deficit. And I think it's a great first start for anyone who's wondering, what type of rest do I need?
And I sent them to your TEDx talk on rest. You did a beautiful job in just like 10 minutes of explaining all the various types of rest. And yeah, so thank you so much for being here. How tell our listeners what you're up to, what are the latest things that you're doing, and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, so um, I spend a lot of time traveling and speaking. So that's where I spend the bulk of my time. We work with companies and organizations, for profit and nonprofit, helping them bring restorative practices into the workplace. So we do a lot of trainings and a lot of workshops, as well as conferences. And so if you'd like to connect, my website is ichoosemybestlife.com. And I have a podcast of the same name, which Dr. Cindy has been on. And you can go there and check out all the different things. It has links to the rest quiz, as well as to a lot of different free resources, including a 30-day challenge where you can, for 30 days, get little prompts from me to let you experiment with the different types of rest to see what kind of activities actually feel restorative to you.
Well, God bless you, Sandra. I'm just in awe of your work, and I just pray that you continue to have great success and flourishing in all that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much, Cindy.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode of Rethink Aging, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone you love. For more episodes and highlights from the show, you can check out more videos right here and here. I also invite you to join the Rethink Aging community at caringforthebody.org, where you can find more resources on how to better protect your brain, strengthen your body, and live with purpose. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.